Hunger tore at the pregnant bobcat's belly as she discovered the puppy dying in the snow, its feeble cries piercing the howling blizzard. Instead of seeing an easy meal, something primal awakened within her that defied every natural law of the wilderness. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The wind howled across the Montana wilderness, carrying with it crystals of ice that bit at any exposed skin. A blizzard had descended upon the Bitterroot Mountains with unexpected ferocity, transforming the landscape into a white wasteland where visibility extended barely beyond an arm's reach. For the creatures of the forest, this sudden storm meant only one thing: seek shelter or perish. Deep within this frozen hellscape, a small sound pierced through the whistling wind, a whimper, barely audible, yet filled with desperation. A tiny Jack Russell puppy, no more than 8 weeks old, trembled violently against the base of a pine tree. His brown and white coat, dusted with snow, provided little protection against the biting cold. How he had ended up here, miles from the nearest human dwelling, was a mystery that would likely never be solved. Abandoned, lost, or separated from hikers. It hardly mattered now, as his chances of survival diminished with each passing minute. The puppy's cries grew weaker as hypothermia began to set in, his small body conserving what little energy remained. Death seemed inevitable in this merciless wilderness. But sometimes, fate has other plans. Less than 50 yards away, a female bobcat moved cautiously through the snow. At 30 pounds, she was larger than most females of her species, her spotted coat thicker than usual to accommodate the harsh Montana winter. More remarkable than her size, however, was her condition. She was pregnant, perhaps only days away from delivering her first litter. In the animal kingdom, this would typically mean extreme caution, avoiding any unnecessary risks that might jeopardize her offspring. The bobcat's amber eyes, designed to detect the slightest movement, caught something unusual in the distance, a small, dark shape against the endless white. Her whiskers twitched as another faint cry reached her sensitive ears. Under normal circumstances, she would have ignored it. Survival in the wild meant focusing solely on one's own needs and those of immediate kin. But something about this sound triggered a response in the expectant mother that defied conventional wildlife behavior. Park Ranger Michael Callahan had spent 15 years patrolling the Bitterroot National Forest, and he thought he'd seen every wonder and tragedy nature had to offer. At 45, his weathered face bore the lines of countless days exposed to the elements, his dark beard now flecked with gray. When the blizzard hit, he'd been checking remote trail cameras, forcing him to seek refuge in a small ranger cabin until the storm passed. "Dispatch, this is Callahan. I'm waiting out the storm at Outpost 7. We'll resume patrol once visibility improves," he radioed, his deep voice filling the simple wooden structure. "Copy that, Ranger Callahan. Stay safe out there. Weather Service says this one's going to be a doozy," came the crackling reply. Michael stoked the fire in the small wood stove, grateful for the warmth as the temperature outside plummeted. He'd spent countless nights in this cabin over the years, a sanctuary during Montana's unpredictable weather. The walls were decorated with photographs of wildlife he'd encountered: moose, wolves, mountain lions, and his personal favorite, the elusive bobcats that roamed the territory. Little did he know that just 3 miles from his cabin, one of those bobcats was about to defy everything he thought he knew about wildlife behavior. The pregnant bobcat approached the whimpering puppy with extreme caution, her instincts warring within her. As a predator, she recognized a small canine, not typically prey, but not a natural ally either. As an expectant mother, she sensed vulnerability and distress that resonated with her own protective instincts. The puppy, nearly frozen, barely registered the approaching predator, too far gone in his hypothermic state to feel fear. For long moments, the bobcat circled the dying puppy, sniffing cautiously. She pawed at the small creature, eliciting a feeble response, just enough to confirm life still remained. What happened next would have astounded any wildlife biologist witnessing it. The bobcat gently took the puppy by the scruff of its neck, just as she would carry one of her own kittens, and lifted the tiny dog from the snow. The storm intensified as the bobcat navigated through the forest, her precious cargo dangling from her mouth. Her den, a small cave formed by fallen rocks beneath an overhanging cliff, lay nearly a mile away. The journey would be treacherous, but instinct drove her forward, each step deliberate in the deepening snow. Whether it was maternal instinct misfiring or some deeper understanding of life's fragility, the pregnant bobcat refused to leave the puppy to die alone in the cold. Back at the cabin, Michael peered through frosted windows at the white void beyond. In all his years as a ranger, he'd developed a sixth sense about the forest and its inhabitants. Something felt different about this storm, a feeling he couldn't quite place. He'd learned long ago to trust these instincts, as they'd saved his life more than once. "First thing tomorrow, I'm doing a sweep of the Eastern Valley," he muttered to himself, marking the location on his map. Something was drawing his attention to that area, though he couldn't have explained why. The bobcat reached her den just as night began to fall, the temperature dropping to dangerous levels. With remarkable gentleness, she placed the puppy on a bed of dried leaves and moss she had prepared for her own impending birth. The small cave, while modest, offered protection from the elements and retained heat well. The bobcat circled the space several times before settling next to the still shivering puppy, her body curling around the tiny dog. This defied every natural law. Predator sheltering potential prey, wild animal caring for a domestic one, a pregnant mother risking her own safety for an unrelated species. Yet here in this small cave, as the blizzard raged outside, nature's rules were being rewritten. The bobcat's warm fur slowly transferred heat to the puppy, whose violent shivering gradually subsided. His small body, which had begun shutting down vital functions to preserve his core, slowly began to recover. Unconsciously, the puppy nuzzled closer to his unlikely savior, seeking the life-giving warmth. Throughout the night, the bobcat remained vigilant, occasionally grooming the puppy with her rough tongue, stimulating circulation just as she would do for her own newborns. Dawn broke with the storm still howling, but inside the den, a miracle was unfolding. The puppy, who by all rights should have perished in the snow, opened his eyes. His first sight was the amber gaze of the bobcat, watching him intently. There was no fear in this exchange, no predator and prey dynamic, only two souls connected by circumstance and survival. The puppy managed to stand on wobbly legs, his tail offering a tentative wag. The bobcat responded by nudging him gently, guiding him back to the warmth of her fur. Hunger began to gnaw at both animals, but the storm showed no signs of abating. The bobcat had not eaten since before finding the puppy, and her pregnancy demanded nutrition. Yet she remained in the den, prioritizing shelter over hunting. Miles away, Ranger Callahan prepared to venture out. The storm had lessened enough to allow limited visibility, and his concern for wildlife caught in the blizzard outweighed his own comfort. He dressed in layers of weatherproof gear, packed emergency supplies, and set out on snowshoes toward the Eastern Valley that had been calling to him. Dispatch Callahan heading out to check the eastern sector. Storm still active but navigable. Will report findings. Copy that, Ranger. Use extreme caution. We've got reports of temperatures dropping to -20 with a wind chill. Michael nodded grimly, though no one could see him. The forest in winter was unforgiving, and he knew better than most how quickly life could slip away in these conditions. As he trudged through knee-deep snow, his thoughts turned to the animals he'd sworn to protect, wondering how many would survive this unexpected onslaught of winter's fury. What he couldn't know was that he was heading directly toward one of the most extraordinary wildlife encounters of his career, a pregnant bobcat who had chosen compassion over instinct, and a puppy whose life hung in the balance of this unprecedented alliance. By midday, the storm had begun to ease, though heavy snow still fell in silent curtains across the forest. Inside the den, the unlikely pair had settled into a tentative coexistence. The puppy, having regained some strength, now explored the small confines of the cave, his natural curiosity temporarily overcoming his weakness. The bobcat watched with what appeared to be patient tolerance, her amber eyes following his every movement. Hunger gnawed at both animals. The bobcat, supporting not only herself but her unborn kittens and now this unexpected charge, needed to hunt. Yet leaving the puppy alone posed risks. The small creature could wander out into the lethal cold or attract predators to their sanctuary. Nature had never prepared the wild feline for such a dilemma. After much restless pacing, the bobcat made her decision. With gentle precision, she picked up the puppy by the scruff once more and carried him to the very back of the den, where a small alcove offered additional protection. She nudged him into this space, then used her paws to partially block the entrance with some of the nesting material. The message was clear even across species boundaries. "Stay here until I return." The puppy whimpered as his protector moved toward the den entrance, but exhaustion soon overcame him, and he curled into a tight ball in the secure nook she had created. Outside, the bobcat faced a harsh reality. Hunting in these conditions would be challenging even without her pregnancy slowing her movements. Snow had buried most signs of small prey, and the storm had driven many animals into deep cover. She would need to rely on all her senses and experience to find sustenance. Ranger Callahan had made slow but steady progress through the eastern sector. The snowshoes prevented him from sinking completely, but each step still required significant effort. His trained eyes scanned the landscape for any signs of wildlife in distress. Broken branches indicating deer trapped in deep drifts, unusual tracks suggesting injured animals, or any other anomalies in the winter tableau. "Quite a storm," he muttered to himself, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Haven't seen one hit this hard since 18. As an experienced tracker, Michael knew that unusual weather often led to unusual animal behavior. Predators and prey might temporarily share shelter. Migration patterns could be disrupted, and survival instincts sometimes overrode territorial boundaries. Still, nothing in his training had prepared him for what he was about to discover. About 2 miles into his patrol, Michael spotted tracks that immediately captured his attention. Bobcat prints, distinctive in their rounded shape with no claw marks visible. These weren't unusual in themselves, but their pattern was puzzling. They didn't show the typical efficient straight-line movement of a hunting cat, but instead meandered almost erratically before heading with purpose toward a rocky outcropping. "What were you doing out in this mess, little cat?" he wondered aloud, kneeling to examine the partially filled prints. Recent enough to still be visible despite the falling snow, perhaps from earlier that morning. More curious still was what appeared to be an irregular drag mark alongside some of the tracks, as though the bobcat had been carrying something. Michael's mind ran through possibilities, perhaps dragging prey, though bobcats typically didn't transport large kills far. Something about these signs raised his professional interest, and he decided to follow them, careful not to disturb the gradually disappearing trail. Meanwhile, the pregnant bobcat had managed to catch a snowshoe hare, her patience and stealth proving successful despite the challenging conditions. The substantial meal would provide much-needed nourishment, and she carried her prize back toward the den with determined steps. Her heightened maternal instincts, already activated by her pregnancy, had somehow extended to include the helpless puppy awaiting her return. As she approached the rocky outcropping that concealed her den, the bobcat froze. Her sensitive nose had detected something alarming, human scent, fresh and coming closer. Under normal circumstances, she would have fled the area immediately, abandoning her den until the human presence had gone. But now, with the puppy hidden inside and her own delivery potentially imminent, fleeing wasn't an option. The bobcat silently placed her kill beneath a fallen log and circled around to observe the threat. There, moving slowly through the snow, was Ranger Callahan, methodically following her tracks from earlier. The feline retreated further into the underbrush, her spotted coat providing perfect camouflage against the dappled shadows of the forest. She would wait and watch, her instincts now sharply focused on protecting both her unborn kittens and the puppy she had saved. Michael was nearing the rocky formation when his radio crackled to life, the sudden noise stark against the winter silence. "Callahan, this is dispatch. Status check requested, over." He quickly reduced the volume before responding. "Dispatch, Callahan here. All good. Found some interesting bobcat tracks in the eastern sector, following to check on the animal. Appears to be moving abnormally, possibly injured." "Copy that. Be advised we've had reports of a domestic animal missing in the western region. Some hikers reported their puppy bolted during the initial storm yesterday. Separate incident, but keep an eye out." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Hikers? In this weather?" "Apparently they were heading out as the storm warnings came in. Thought they could beat it back to the trailhead. Dog got spooked by thunder and ran off." "Poor thing wouldn't have lasted the night in these temperatures," Michael replied grimly. "I'll keep an eye out, but I'd say that's a recovery, not a rescue operation at this point. Callahan out." Inside the den, the puppy had awakened from his brief sleep, hunger once again driving him to restlessness. He began to whimper, his small voice echoing slightly in the confined space. Under normal circumstances, the sound would have been too faint to hear from outside, but in the pristine silence following the storm, with Ranger Callahan standing just 30 yards away, it was enough. Michael froze, his trained ears catching the faint sound. "What the—" He turned slowly toward the rocky outcropping, all his senses now alert. That had sounded like... But it couldn't be. Not out here. Not after a night in these conditions. The bobcat, still hidden in the underbrush, tensed as she saw the human's attention turn toward her den. Every instinct told her to attack, to draw the threat away, but she was smart enough to recognize the futility of confronting a human. Instead, she would need to outthink him. With deliberate movements, she circled around behind the ranger, then deliberately stepped on a brittle branch. The crack echoed through the clearing. Michael spun around, his hand instinctively moving to the bear spray on his belt. His eyes scanned the tree line but saw nothing. Years of experience told him he was being watched, and by something intelligent enough to want his attention. "Hello there," he said softly, recognizing the tactic. "You're trying to pull me away from something, aren't you?" As if in answer, the bobcat emerged partially from the underbrush about 50 yards away, just enough to be seen before disappearing again. Michael had worked with wildlife long enough to know this wasn't normal behavior. Bobcats didn't show themselves to humans voluntarily. Something very unusual was happening. Inside the den, the puppy's whimpering grew louder as hunger and loneliness intensified. This time, the sound was unmistakable to the ranger's ears. "That's a dog?" Michael whispered in disbelief, turning back toward the rocky outcropping. "Out here?" The bobcat, seeing her diversion fail, made a decision that defied every natural instinct. She emerged fully from cover and stood in plain sight, staring directly at the human. Their eyes met across the snowy clearing. Wild amber meeting stunned human blue in a moment of cross-species communication that transcended words. Then, with deliberate slowness, the bobcat began walking toward her den, stopping every few steps to look back at the ranger, clearly intending for him to follow. Michael had witnessed many incredible things in his years in the wilderness, but nothing had prepared him for a bobcat, a pregnant one judging by her swollen abdomen, apparently trying to lead him somewhere. Everything in his training warned against following a wild predator, yet his instincts told him this was an extraordinary situation that required breaking protocol. "I must be out of my mind," he muttered, but began carefully following the bobcat, maintaining a respectful distance while keeping his bear spray accessible. "What are you trying to show me, Mama Cat?" Michael followed the bobcat with measured steps, maintaining a respectful distance. In his 15 years as a ranger, he'd encountered every predator native to these mountains: bears, mountain lions, wolves, but never had one behaved like this. The bobcat moved with purpose, occasionally looking back as if to ensure he was still following, her pregnant belly swaying slightly with each deliberate step. "This goes against everything in the handbook," Michael muttered to himself, but continued forward. His radio remained silent on his belt. He knew trying to explain this situation to dispatch would be futile. Some things in nature had to be witnessed to be believed. The bobcat led him to the base of the rocky outcropping, then suddenly disappeared into what appeared to be a small opening between the boulders. Michael approached cautiously, crouching to examine what was clearly the entrance to a den. From within came another whimper, unmistakably canine. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered. He removed his heavy gloves and pulled a small flashlight from his breast pocket. Shining it into the opening revealed a narrow passage that opened into a larger chamber. And there, at the back of the den, partially hidden in what appeared to be a carefully constructed nest, was a small brown and white puppy. The pup blinked against the sudden light, then began wagging its tail weakly, emitting another plaintive whimper. It attempted to stand but seemed too weak to manage it. Behind the puppy, the bobcat had positioned herself protectively, her amber eyes reflecting the flashlight beam as she watched the human intently. "Easy, Mama," Michael said softly. "I'm not here to hurt either of you." Years of wildlife management had taught him to recognize the difference between aggression and protection. This bobcat showed no signs of wanting to attack. Instead, she seemed to be presenting the puppy to him as if she wanted help. The realization struck him like a physical blow. "You brought him here, didn't you? You saved him." The bobcat blinked slowly, maintaining her position behind the puppy. Michael keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Callahan. You're not going to believe this, but I think I've found that missing puppy." The radio crackled. "That's great news, Ranger. The owners are beside themselves. What's its condition?" "Alive but weak. Dehydrated and hungry, I'd say. But that's not the unbelievable part." He paused, knowing what he was about to say would sound impossible. "It's in a bobcat den. A pregnant bobcat appears to have rescued it from the storm." The long silence that followed confirmed what he'd expected. No one would believe this without seeing it. "Ranger Callahan, please repeat. Did you say a bobcat has the puppy?" "Affirmative, and she led me to it deliberately. I need Dr. Elena Vasquez to meet me at the Eastern Trailhead with veterinary supplies, and tell her to bring her wildlife camera. We're going to need documentation." "Copy that, though I think she's going to have as many questions as we do." "She's not the only one," Michael replied, his eyes never leaving the extraordinary scene before him. The immediate challenge was getting the puppy out safely, without distressing the bobcat. Despite her seemingly altruistic behavior, she was still a wild predator and one protecting both unborn kittens and now this adopted charge. Push her too far and natural instincts might take over. "Okay, little mama," Michael said in the same calm, soft voice he'd use with any wild animal. "I need to check on your friend here." He slowly extended his hand into the den, palm down in a non-threatening posture. The bobcat watched intently, but made no move to attack. Taking this as permission, Michael carefully reached toward the puppy. The small dog reacted with surprising energy at human contact, attempting to crawl toward Michael's hand. The bobcat tensed momentarily, but then, remarkably, nudged the puppy forward with her nose as if encouraging the contact. Michael couldn't believe what he was witnessing. "You know he needs human help, don't you? Somehow you know." With extreme care, he lifted the puppy from the den. The small animal was dangerously thin and cold to the touch despite the relative warmth of the den. It needed veterinary attention soon. "Thank you," Michael said to the bobcat, feeling slightly foolish talking to a wild animal, yet somehow certain she understood the gravity of the situation. "I'll take good care of him, I promise." He was preparing to retreat when he noticed the bobcat becoming restless, pacing at the entrance to her den. Something had changed. Her breathing seemed more labored, and she kept looking back into the deeper recesses of the cave. "Oh no," Michael whispered as understanding dawned. "Your timing couldn't be worse, Mama." The signs were unmistakable to anyone familiar with wildlife. The bobcat was going into labor. The stress of the encounter, combined with the physical exertion of hunting in the storm, had likely accelerated her delivery timeline. She needed peace and security to birth her kittens, not human presence, no matter how well-intentioned. Michael faced a difficult decision. The puppy needed immediate medical attention, but leaving now meant abandoning the bobcat during her most vulnerable hours. If her unusual behavior with the puppy indicated some problem with her maternal instincts, her kittens could be at risk as well. "Dispatch situation update," he radioed. "The bobcat appears to be going into labor. Request Dr. Vasquez expedite and bring appropriate wildlife monitoring equipment." Ranger Callahan, standard protocol is non-intervention with wildlife birth. "I'm aware of protocol," he cut in, more sharply than intended. "This is an exceptional situation. That bobcat saved this puppy's life. We owe her the same consideration." Another pause, then, "Understood. Dr. Vasquez is already en route. ETA 40 minutes. Michael looked down at the shivering puppy in his arms, then back at the increasingly distressed bobcat. 40 minutes might be too long," he muttered. Drawing on years of wilderness first aid and limited veterinary training, Michael made a quick assessment of the puppy. Dehydrated and malnourished, yes, but no obvious injuries or frostbite. It needed warmth, fluids, and calories, all things he carried in his emergency pack. He retreated a short distance from the den, found shelter beneath a large pine tree, and quickly set up a makeshift treatment station. From his pack, he extracted an emergency thermal blanket, wrapped the puppy securely, then prepared a mixture of warm water with a small amount of the honey he carried for emergency energy. Using the cap of his water bottle as a makeshift dish, he carefully helped the puppy drink, offering tiny amounts to avoid shocking its system. "Easy does it, little fighter," he encouraged as the puppy lapped weakly at the sweet liquid. "Just enough to get your strength up." Between administering care to the puppy, Michael kept glancing toward the den. The bobcat had retreated inside, but occasional low growls indicated her labor was progressing. Every instinct in him as a wildlife officer urged him to maintain distance from a birthing predator, yet something stronger, perhaps the same inexplicable instinct that had led the bobcat to save the puppy, told him he needed to stay close. After ensuring the puppy had taken enough fluids to temporarily stabilize its condition, Michael secured it inside his jacket, where his body heat would provide warmth. He then moved back toward the den, positioning himself near enough to monitor the situation, but far enough away to avoid causing additional stress. "I'm right here, Mama," he called softly. "You're not alone." As he settled in to wait, Michael reflected on the extraordinary chain of events. A wild predator had defied every natural instinct to rescue a member of another species. Then, rather than retreating from human presence, she had actively sought it out when the puppy needed help beyond what she could provide. It challenged everything he thought he knew about wildlife behavior. The sound of an approaching snowmobile broke through his thoughts. Dr. Elena Vasquez had arrived sooner than expected. her petite form bundled against the cold as she navigated the final distance on snowshoes, medical pack bouncing against her back. "Michael!" she called, her voice carrying in the clear post-storm air. "Where are you?" Dispatch said something about a bobcat and a puppy. "Over here," he replied, standing carefully. "And keep your voice down. She's in labor." Elena's dark eyes widened as she took in the scene, the ranger cradling a puppy inside his jacket, the nearby den with occasional sounds of a laboring bobcat, and the stunning landscape of fresh snow surrounding them. "You better start from the beginning," she said, already reaching for the puppy to assess its condition. "Because this sounds like either a miracle or madness." "Maybe a bit of both," Michael replied, his eyes never leaving the den entrance. "But seeing is believing." "Doctor?" Helena Vasquez worked with practiced efficiency, her gloved hands moving deftly as she examined the puppy. At 36, she had spent the last decade as the region's wildlife veterinarian, splitting her time between the park's research center and emergency field operations. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and despite the cold, beads of concentration perspiration dotted her forehead as she worked. "Male Jack Russell Terrier, approximately 8 weeks old," she murmured, more to herself than to Michael. "Moderate hypothermia, dehydration, and early malnutrition, but no frostbite or serious injuries. It's remarkable." "Remarkable doesn't begin to cover it," Michael replied, his eyes still fixed on the bobcat's den. "He spent at least 12 hours in the worst blizzard we've had this season. He should be dead. And instead, he was rescued by the one creature that should have seen him as either competition or prey." Elena shook her head in amazement as she administered subcutaneous fluids to the puppy. "I've worked with wildlife for 15 years, and I've never seen or heard of anything like this." The puppy whimpered as the needle entered his skin, but seemed to understand the humans were helping. His brown eyes, bright despite his weakened state, moved between Elena and Michael with growing alertness. "The owners called him Charlie," Elena said, carefully wrapping the puppy in specialized thermal blankets after completing her examination. "They're local. The Petersons from Missoula. Brought their kids for a weekend winter hike when the storm hit faster than predicted. They've been beside themselves. They're lucky their puppy encountered a bobcat with maternal instincts instead of a mountain lion or wolf," Michael said. "Any other predator would have—" He didn't finish the sentence. They both knew the harsh realities of wilderness survival. A louder growl emanated from the den, followed by a series of short, sharp vocalizations that both professionals recognized immediately. "First kitten's coming," Elena said, her attention now divided between her canine patient and the wild drama unfolding nearby. "Michael, we need to make a decision. Protocol says we maintain maximum distance from wildlife births." Michael nodded grimly. "And protocol also says we don't interfere with predator-prey relationships. Yet here we are with a puppy that should have been dinner becoming a house guest instead." He considered their options. The puppy was stable enough to transport, but taking him away now meant abandoning the bobcat during her most vulnerable time. Something about that felt wrong, a betrayal of the trust she had shown by leading him to her den. "What if we compromise?" Elena suggested, reading his conflicted expression. "I've got monitoring equipment, small infrared camera, directional microphone. We could set them up at a safe distance, retreat to your cabin with the puppy for proper treatment, and monitor the birth remotely." Michael considered this. That could work, but someone should stay nearby just in case there are complications. Elena raised an eyebrow. "You know as well as I do that wildlife mothers typically handle birth just fine without human midwives." "This isn't exactly a typical wildlife mother," Michael countered, gesturing toward the den. "She adopted a puppy, Elena. She led a human to her den while in labor. Everything about her behavior is unprecedented." Before Elena could respond, Another series of growls emerged from the den, more intense than before. Without discussion, both professionals moved closer, their training temporarily overridden by concern and, if they were honest, fascination. Using the camera equipment from Elena's pack, they established a careful monitoring system that allowed them to see into the den without disturbing its occupant. The infrared technology revealed the Bobcat in the midst of delivering her first kitten, her body contorted with the effort of birth. "She looks healthy," Elena whispered, watching through the small monitor screen. "Good positioning, strong contractions." Michael nodded, relief evident in his expression. Despite years of maintaining professional detachment from the wildlife he protected, this particular Bobcat had somehow breached those barriers. Her extraordinary behavior had transformed her from just another predator into an individual deserving of personal concern. As they watched, the first kitten emerged, tiny, wet, and blind, barely the size of a mouse. The Bobcat immediately began cleaning it with her rough tongue, stimulating its breathing and circulation. The newborn responded with minute movements, its miniature form barely visible on the infrared monitor. "One down," Elena murmured. Bobcats typically have 2 to 4 kittens per litter. The second kitten followed 20 minutes later, the process seemingly smoother than the first. By this time, Charlie the puppy had fallen asleep in his thermal wrappings, his body finally surrendering to exhaustion now that he was safe and receiving care. As they monitored the birth, Elena and Michael spoke in hushed tones about the implications of what they were witnessing. "There have been documented cases of interspecies adoption in captivity," Elena said. "Even some instances in the wild, a lioness adopting an antelope calf, dolphins protecting swimmers from sharks, but those are typically explained as misfiring maternal instincts or cases of mutual benefit." "And this?" Michael gestured toward the den. "This defies easy explanation," she admitted. "A pregnant Bobcat expending precious energy to rescue a member of the canine family, historical competitors in the wild, then actively seeking human intervention when she couldn't provide adequate care. It suggests a level of empathy and decision-making we don't typically attribute to wildlife." The third kitten arrived as they spoke, smaller than the others but equally vigorous once its mother had cleaned it. The Bobcat arranged all 3 newborns against her belly, guiding them to nurse for the first time. "I think that's it," Elena said after another 30 minutes passed with no further deliveries. 3 healthy kittens from what I can tell. A successful birth by any standard. Michael nodded, a smile spreading across his weathered face. She did it, and now she's got her own family to care for. "Which brings us back to Charlie," Elena said, glancing at the sleeping puppy. "He needs more comprehensive care than we can provide here, and the Petersons are waiting for news." She hesitated, then added what they were both thinking. "And our Bobcat mother will have her paws full with 3 kittens. She won't be able to care for a puppy as well." Michael sighed, knowing Elena was right. The natural order would reassert itself now. The miraculous exception that had saved Charlie's life would give way to the ordinary demands of nature, a mother caring for her biological offspring. "Let's get him back to the center," he agreed reluctantly. "But I want to continue monitoring her and the kittens. This whole situation is unprecedented. There could be valuable research implications." "Already ahead of you," Elena said, pointing to the small weatherproof camera she had secured near the den entrance. "It's motion activated and has enough battery for 2 weeks. We'll have video documentation of everything." As they prepared to leave, Michael approached the den entrance one last time. The Bobcat was visible just inside, her 3 kittens now nursing contentedly. When she sensed his presence, she looked up, their eyes meeting in that same mysterious connection as before. "Thank you," he said softly, "for trusting me, for showing us something extraordinary." The Bobcat blinked slowly, then returned her attention to her newborns. It wasn't dismissal so much as a shift in priorities. Her biological kittens needed her now. "Ready?" Elena asked, the puppy securely bundled against her chest for the journey back. Michael nodded, tearing his eyes away from the den. "Let's go home. All of us." The trek back through the snow was easier than the journey in, their steps quickened by purpose and the improving weather. As they approached the snowmobile, Elena's radio crackled with an incoming transmission. "Dr. Vasquez, Ranger Callahan, please update on the puppy's condition. The Peterson family is at headquarters awaiting news." Elena keyed her radio. "Puppy is stable and responding well to treatment. Estimate arrival at headquarters in approximately 1 hour." "Copy that. The Petersons will be relieved." Michael helped Elena secure Charlie in a specialized carrier attached to the snowmobile, ensuring the thermal blankets remained snug around his small body. As Elena prepared to start the engine, Michael made a decision. "Tell headquarters I'll be delayed. I'm going to remain at Outpost 7 tonight to monitor the Bobcat family." Elena gave him a knowing look. "Professional interest only, of course." "Of course," he replied, not quite meeting her eyes. "I'll send someone out with additional supplies tomorrow," she said. "And Michael, document everything. This could change how we understand wildlife behavior." As the sound of the snowmobile faded into the distance, Michael trudged toward the small cabin that would be his home for the night. From there, he could monitor the video feed from the Bobcat's den while updating his field notes with this extraordinary encounter. The quiet that followed was profound, the special silence that comes after a snowstorm when the world seems remade and pristine. In that silence, 2 mothers cared for their young, one a wild bobcat with new kittens, the other a human veterinarian cradling a rescued puppy. Connected by an act of compassion that defied explanation, yet felt somehow like the most natural thing in the world. The Peterson family gathered anxiously in the park headquarters main room, their faces bearing the distinct strain of people who had spent hours fearing the worst. David Peterson, a tall man in his early 40s with premature silver at his temples, paced the length of the room while his wife Jennifer sat with their 2 children, Emma, 10, and Liam, 7. The children's eyes were red-rimmed from crying, though they had reached the quiet, exhausted stage of grief where tears give way to silent dread. "Do you really think they found Charlie?" Emma asked her mother for perhaps the 10th time, her voice small and uncertain. Jennifer Peterson squeezed her daughter's hand. "The rangers said they found a puppy matching Charlie's description. We just have to wait and see." "But he was out all night in the snow," Liam whispered. "Dad said animals don't survive that." David Peterson stopped pacing long enough to kneel beside his son. "I said most animals, buddy. And Charlie is tough, remember? Plus, the rangers here are the best at what they do." The sound of a vehicle approaching drew everyone's attention to the windows. A Park Service SUV pulled up, and Dr. Elena Vasquez emerged, carrying a small bundle wrapped in thermal blankets. "Charlie!" Emma shouted, already running for the door before her parents could stop her. Elena entered with a smile, the bundle in her arms wiggling with newfound energy. "I believe I have something that belongs to you," she said, kneeling to let Emma see the puppy's face peering out from the blankets. Charlie's reaction was immediate and jubilant. His entire body wriggled with excitement, his tail becoming a blur of motion as he recognized his family. Elena carefully handed him to Emma, who received him with the reverent gentleness of a child handling her most precious possession. "He's really okay?" Jennifer asked, tears of relief streaming down her face as she and Liam joined Emma on the floor, all 3 surrounding the puppy with gentle touches and tearful laughter. "He's remarkably okay," Elena confirmed, standing to address the parents. "Dehydrated, hungry, and he experienced moderate hypothermia, but no lasting damage. He's received fluids and nutrients and his body temperature is back to normal. Honestly, it's nothing short of miraculous." David Peterson shook his head in disbelief. "When he ran off during the thunder, we searched for hours until the Rangers made us evacuate because of the storm. We all thought." "How did you find him?" Jennifer asked, looking up from where she knelt beside her children. "The search area must have been enormous." Elena exchanged a glance with the park director, who had been standing quietly to the side. This was the part of the story they had debated how to share. The scientific improbability of what had happened might sound like a ranger's tall tale to the distraught family. "Your puppy was very lucky," Elena began carefully. "He was found by another of our forest residents who took him to shelter." "Another hiker?" David asked. "Not exactly," Elena said. "He was found and sheltered by a bobcat." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by Charlie's happy panting as he soaked in his family's attention. "A bobcat," David repeated flatly. "As in a wild predator bobcat." Elena nodded. "A pregnant female. She appears to have found Charlie during the storm, carried him to her den, and kept him warm through the night. When our ranger followed her tracks this morning, she actually led him to the den where Charlie was being kept." "That's impossible," Jennifer whispered, instinctively pulling Charlie closer. "Bobcats hunt small animals. They don't rescue them." "Under normal circumstances, you'd be absolutely right," Elena agreed. "This is unprecedented behavior. We're still trying to understand it ourselves." "Is this some kind of joke?" David asked, his voice hardening. "Because after what we've been through—" "It's not a joke, Mr. Peterson," the park director interjected. "We have photographic evidence and two credible witnesses, Dr. Vasquez and Ranger Callahan, both respected wildlife professionals. What happened defies conventional understanding of predator behavior, but it happened nonetheless." Emma, who had been listening with wide eyes, looked down at Charlie with newfound wonder. "A wild kitty saved you," she whispered to the puppy, "like in a fairy tale." Out in the wilderness, miles from this emotional reunion, Michael Callahan sat in the Spartan comfort of Outpost 7, his eyes fixed on the tablet, displaying the live feed from the bobcat's den. The three kittens, now dry and fluffy, nursed contentedly while their mother rested, her eyes half closed in the exhausted satisfaction of successful birth. Michael had spent hours documenting everything: the kitten's first movements, the mother's attentive grooming, the careful positioning of the newborns against her warm belly. But beyond the scientific observations, he found himself simply watching in quiet appreciation of this intimate family moment. His radio crackled, breaking the silence. "Callahan, this is Vasquez. Come in." "Callahan here. How did the reunion go?" "Tearful and joyous, as you'd expect. Charlie's going to be fine. The Petersons are taking him to their regular vet tomorrow for a follow-up, but he's already bounced back remarkably well. How's our other mother doing?" Michael glanced at the screen. "3 healthy kittens, all nursing well. She's resting comfortably, no signs of distress." "Good, listen, the story's getting attention. I had to explain to the Petersons what happened, and the park director was there. He's already fielded calls from regional wildlife services and 2 universities." Michael grimaced. He had expected interest, but not so quickly. "What are they saying?" "They want documentation, interviews, access to the site, the usual research frenzy when something challenges established understanding. The bobcat just gave birth. The last thing she needs is a parade of researchers disturbing her den." "I know. That's why the director is implementing a restricted zone around the area. 1-mile radius, no access except authorized personnel. But they'll want your observations, photos, everything you've documented." Michael nodded to himself, relieved at the protection for the bobcat family but wary of the attention. "I'll prepare a preliminary report tonight, But Elena, this isn't just a scientific curiosity. This is special. Her voice softened. I know. I felt it too. Listen, I'm sending Peterson and supplies out to you tomorrow morning. He'll bring everything you need for an extended stay if you're planning to continue monitoring. I am, Michael confirmed, more quickly than he intended. After signing off, Michael returned his attention to the video feed. The Bobcat had shifted position slightly, her head now raised as she surveyed her new family. For a moment, it seemed like she was looking directly into the camera, those amber eyes connecting with his across the digital divide. You've started something remarkable, Mama Cat, he said softly to the screen. And I'm not going to let anyone disturb you while you raise those little ones. As night fell over the Montana wilderness, the story of the Bobcat and the puppy began spreading beyond the park's boundaries. Dr. Vasquez, after ensuring Charlie was safely home with the Petersons, found herself fielding calls from colleagues across the country. The park director issued a brief press statement, deliberately vague on details to protect the Bobcat's location while confirming the unusual rescue. By morning, what had been an extraordinary but private wildlife encounter had become a matter of public fascination. Local news stations led with the story of a puppy's miraculous survival, and social media buzzed with speculation and amateur theories about why a predator would save potential prey. At first light, Michael stepped outside the cabin to check weather conditions and found 3 ravens perched on nearby trees, their black forms stark against the snow. Ravens were intelligent opportunists, often following predators in hopes of scavenging leftover kills. Their presence near the cabin rather than the den was curious. As he watched, one raven took flight, circling over the forest before returning to its perch. The bird's behavior triggered Michael's intuition. Something was happening in the area that had drawn their attention. He grabbed his binoculars and scanned the tree line, looking for any sign of disturbance. Initially, he saw nothing unusual, but as he continued his methodical survey, movement caught his eye, a flash of gray between the pines, approximately half a mile north of the Bobcat's den. No, he muttered, focusing the binoculars more carefully. Not now. There, moving with purposeful stealth through the forest, was a wolf, and where there was one wolf, others would follow. The pack had entered the territory, drawn perhaps by the scent of birth or the unusual concentration of human activity. Michael reached for his radio, then hesitated. A wolf pack passing through wasn't unusual or necessarily threatening. Wolves and bobcats shared these mountains and generally avoided direct conflict. But a mother bobcat with newborn kittens was vulnerable, and this particular bobcat had already demonstrated behavior outside the norm. He made his decision quickly, grabbing his pack and heading out. He would observe the wolves' movements, assess whether they posed a risk to the bobcat family, and intercept Peterson with the supplies. This situation required careful monitoring. Nature had already delivered one miracle in these woods, but it would be foolish to expect another. The forest had transformed overnight, the storm's violence replaced by pristine stillness. Michael moved quietly through knee-deep snow, following the wolf tracks with practiced ease. 15 years in these mountains had taught him to read the landscape like a book, each paw print, broken twig, and disturbed snowbank telling part of an ongoing story. The wolf tracks indicated a small pack, perhaps 4 or 5 individuals. They were moving deliberately but not hunting. Their pattern suggested territorial exploration rather than pursuit. Still, they were heading in a direction that would take them near the bobcat's den, and that concerned Michael enough to abandon his post at the cabin. He paused at a ridge overlooking a small clearing, using his binoculars to scan the area. There, at the far edge, 3 wolves moved in a loose formation. The leader, a large gray male with distinctive black markings on his face, stopped periodically to scent the air. Behind him followed two smaller wolves, likely yearlings from the previous season's litter. Meridian pack, Michael murmured to himself, recognizing the alpha male. This particular wolf family had been tracked and studied for years, their territory typically lying further west. The harsh winter had likely pushed them to expand their range in search of prey. His radio crackled, startling a nearby snowshoe hare into bounding away. "Callahan, this is Peterson. I'm approaching Outpost 7 with your supplies. Over." "Peterson, this is Callahan. I'm not at the cabin. I've spotted Meridian pack moving near Sector 5, approximately half-mile north of our special project. Meet me at coordinates 4437 by 11285. Bring the deterrent kit. Over." "Copy that. ETA 20 minutes. Over." Michael continued observing the wolves, noting their direction and pace. They weren't moving directly toward the Bobcat's den, but their path would take them close enough for scent detection. Wolves typically avoided confrontation with bobcats. The risk-reward calculation usually favored leaving the smaller predators alone. But a female with newborn kittens might be viewed differently, either as vulnerable prey or as competition to be eliminated. Back at park headquarters, Dr. Vasquez was facing a different kind of pressure. Her office had become the center of a small storm of scientific interest, her phone ringing constantly with calls from wildlife researchers, behavioral biologists, and conservation organizations. "No, we're not permitting site visits at this time," she explained to yet another university researcher. "The Bobcat has just given birth, and the area is under protective restriction. Yes, I understand the research potential, but our priority is the welfare of the animals." She had barely ended the call when Park Director Sanders appeared in her doorway, his typically composed face showing signs of strain. "Elena, we need to talk about the media situation. It's escalating beyond what we anticipated." She sighed, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "How bad?" "The story hit national news this morning. Miracle in Montana. Predator saves puppy from blizzard. We've had 3 TV crews arrive at the visitor center already, and I've got calls from network morning shows wanting live remotes." "They can't possibly expect access to the Bobcat," Elena said, alarmed. "No, but they want interviews, background on Bobcat behavior, expert commentary on what might have motivated the rescue, and they want footage. The Peterson family has already given an interview to local news, complete with the puppy as star attraction." Elena rubbed her temples. As a scientist, she understood the extraordinary nature of what they'd witnessed. As a wildlife veterinarian, her priority remained the well-being of the animals in her care. "We need to control the narrative," she decided. "I'll prepare an official statement with factual information about Bobcat behavior and why this case is unprecedented. We can release the initial photos Michael took of the den, but nothing that would help identify its location. And we emphasize that any disturbance could endanger the mother and newborn kittens." Sanders nodded. "Good. And the research requests?" "We document everything ourselves for now. Once the kittens are older and more mobile, we can consider limited supervised research access for qualified scientists." In the forest, Michael had positioned himself strategically, watching as the wolves continued their patrol. They had altered course slightly, now moving in a direction that would bypass the Bobcat's den by several hundred yards, still close but perhaps not close enough to detect her scent. The sound of approaching snowshoes announced Peterson's arrival. Jake Peterson was newer to the Ranger Service, only 3 years on the job, but had quickly earned respect for his diligence and keen observational skills. At 30, he had the energy of youth combined with a natural calm that served him well in wildlife management. "Meridian pack?" he asked quietly, crouching beside Michael. Michael nodded. 3 of them that I can see, probably more nearby. They're not actively hunting, but they're definitely exploring new territory. "That's close to our miracle bobcat," Peterson commented, using the nickname that had already spread among park staff. "Too close for comfort," Michael agreed. "I want to lay down some deterrence, create a perimeter that will discourage them from investigating that area more closely." From the pack Peterson had carried, they extracted specialized wolf deterrents, scent markers that mimicked the territorial markings of other predators, combined with subtle sound devices that emitted frequencies wolves found mildly uncomfortable. These humane tools had been developed specifically to guide wolf movement without harming or overly disturbing the animals. "We'll place them in a semicircle, using the ridge as a natural boundary on the other side," Michael explained, marking locations on his GPS. "That should nudge them toward the eastern valley instead." "Is this standard procedure?" Peterson asked, carefully not looking at Michael as he prepared the deterrents. "Setting up exclusion zones around bobcat dens?" The question hung in the air, a gentle probe into Michael's unusual level of involvement with this particular situation. Park protocol typically emphasized minimal intervention, allowing natural processes to unfold without human direction. "You know it's not," Michael finally said. "But then, rescuing puppies isn't standard bobcat procedure either. Sometimes we need to adapt to extraordinary circumstances." Peterson nodded, accepting this explanation without further comment. As they worked, setting the deterrents at strategic intervals, Michael's tablet pinged with an alert from the den camera. He pulled it from his pack, Peterson looking over his shoulder as the screen illuminated. The bobcat was moving her kittens, a normal behavior as mothers occasionally relocated their young to ensure safety. One by one, she gently carried each tiny kitten to a slightly deeper recess in the den, but what caught both rangers' attention was what happened after she settled the kittens in their new position. The bobcat returned to the front section of the den, where Charlie the puppy had been kept. She paced the area, sniffing intently at spots where the puppy had rested. Then, remarkably, she looked directly toward the camera and emitted a soft chirping sound, a vocalization typically used by mother bobcats to call their kittens. "Is she looking for the puppy?" Peterson asked incredulously. Michael watched, transfixed, as the bobcat continued searching the den's entrance area, her behavior unmistakably indicating she was seeking something missing. "It seems that way. Even after giving birth to her own kittens, she remembers him." This observation added another layer to the already extraordinary story. Not only had the bobcat rescued the puppy during a crisis, but she had formed some kind of attachment that persisted even after her maternal instincts should have redirected entirely to her biological offspring. "We need to document this," Peterson said, already taking screenshots of the tablet. "Dr. Vasquez needs to see this behavior." Michael nodded, but his attention was drawn back to the wolf pack now moving along the path they had anticipated. The deterrents seemed to be working, the lead wolf occasionally stopping to scent the air before adjusting course away from the hidden markers. "They're redirecting," he observed with relief. "With any luck, they'll move through to the eastern valley, without ever coming close to the den." Peterson packed up their remaining supplies. "Should we head back to the cabin? Storm forecast says we might get another 4 inches tonight." Michael glanced once more at the tablet, where the bobcat had finally settled back with her kittens, though her movements still seemed restless. "You go ahead. I want to maintain visual observation of the pack until they're clear of the area." "Michael," Peterson said carefully, "you've been out here for nearly 24 hours straight. Protocol says—" "I know what protocol says," Michael interrupted, his voice sharper than intended. He softened his tone. 4 more hours, then I'll head back, get some rest. I promise." As Peterson departed, Michael settled into his observation position, binoculars trained on the retreating wolf pack. His thoughts, however, remained with the bobcat who had defied natural law to save a helpless puppy, and who now seemed to be mourning its absence despite having newborns of her own to care for. Something extraordinary was happening in these woods. something that challenged not just scientific understanding of predator behavior, but deeper questions about compassion and connection across the boundaries that supposedly separated wild from domestic, predator from prey, animal instinct from something that looked remarkably like empathy. 3 days had passed since the discovery of Charlie in the Bobcat's den. 3 days of constant monitoring, documentation, and growing public fascination with what the media had dubbed the miracle in Montana. The Bobcat and her kittens remained in the den, protected by the exclusion zone and the deterrents that had successfully redirected the wolf pack away from the area. Michael had maintained his vigil from the cabin, sleeping in short bursts between observation sessions. Despite Park Director Sanders' suggestion that they rotate staff, Michael had insisted on remaining the primary observer. His argument, that introducing new human scents near the den might stress the mother, was scientifically sound. But those who knew him well recognized something deeper driving his dedication. On this morning, as pale winter sunlight filtered through the pines, Dr. Vasquez arrived at Outpost 7 with fresh supplies and equipment. Her SUV trudged up the snow-covered service road, chains biting into the compacted surface for traction. "You look terrible," she announced without preamble as Michael greeted her outside the cabin. He ran a hand over his unshaven face and shrugged. "Sleep isn't a priority right now." "It should be," she countered, handing him a thermos of coffee. "Exhausted observers miss details. Scientific principle, not personal criticism." They moved inside the cabin where multiple monitors now displayed different angles of the Bobcat's den, courtesy of additional cameras Peterson had installed under Michael's direction. The screens showed the Bobcat grooming her kittens, who had nearly doubled in size over just 3 days. Their fur had fluffed out, tiny spotted coats beginning to resemble their mother's distinctive pattern. "They're developing normally," Elena observed, her professional eye evaluating the kitten's condition. "Good weight gain, appropriate activity levels. She's an excellent mother." "Watch this," Michael said, pulling up stored footage on his tablet. "This happens twice daily, like clockwork." The video showed the Bobcat carefully arranging her kittens in a warm huddle, then moving to the front section of the den, the area where Charlie had been kept. She performed the same searching behavior they had witnessed days earlier, complete with the chirping vocalization that mother Bobcats used to call their young. "She's still looking for him," Elena murmured, her scientific skepticism warring with the obvious evidence before her. "Even after 3 days. Not just looking," Michael corrected. "Watch what she does next." The footage continued, showing the Bobcat returning to the deeper section of the den. What happened next caused Elena to inhale sharply. The mother Bobcat picked up one of her kittens and carried it to the front section, placing it precisely where Charlie had been. She repeated this with the other 2 kittens, ultimately arranging all 3 in the same spot where she had kept the puppy warm. "It's like she's recreating what happened with Charlie," Elena said, struggling to find scientific language for behavior that defied conventional explanation. "Using her own kittens to replace the missing puppy in that space." "She does this every morning and evening," Michael confirmed. "The rest of the time she keeps them in the more protected rear section, but twice a day without fail this ritual occurs." Elena sat back, her trained scientific mind racing to contextualize what she was witnessing. There are documented cases of animals appearing to mourn lost companions, elephants returning to the remains of family members, primates carrying deceased infants. But this level of specific behavioral pattern associated with an adopted animal of another species, and it's unprecedented. "She's grieving," Michael said simply. "Or at least experiencing something analogous to grief as we understand it." Elena nodded slowly, her usual scientific caution momentarily set aside. "I think you're right. The question is, what do we do with this information?" The question wasn't merely academic. In the 3 days since Charlie's rescue, The story had exploded across traditional and social media. The Peterson family had appeared on 2 national morning shows, Charlie happily wagging his tail beside them as they recounted their miracle in the mountains. Wildlife channels had assembled expert panels to discuss possible explanations for the bobcat's behavior, theories ranging from misplaced maternal instinct to more speculative ideas about cross-species empathy. The scientific community is divided, Elena continued, showing Michael her tablet with dozens of email inquiries from researchers. Half want to study this as a unique case of aberrant maternal behavior. The other half what? Michael prompted when she hesitated. They're wondering if we should consider reuniting Charlie with the bobcat under controlled observation to study the ongoing interaction. Michael's head snapped up, his fatigue instantly forgotten. Absolutely not. That would be completely irresponsible. I agree, Elena said quickly. I rejected those proposals immediately. Charlie is a domestic animal who belongs with his human family, and the bobcat needs to focus on raising her biological offspring. Whatever connection they formed was extraordinary, but temporary, a product of extreme circumstances. Yet even as she spoke, both wildlife professionals found themselves looking at the monitor where the bobcat was now returning her kittens to the safer rear section of the den, but not before lingering at the entrance, her gaze directed outward, as if still expecting something, or someone, to return. Across town, in the Peterson family home, a similar scene of maternal care was unfolding. Jennifer Peterson sat on the living room floor, watching as Charlie played with the children. The puppy had recovered remarkably well, showing no lasting effects from his ordeal beyond a slightly increased appetite. He seems completely normal, David observed, joining his wife with 2 cups of coffee. You'd never know he spent a night being babysat by a wild predator. Jennifer nodded, but her expression remained thoughtful. The kids want to do something for the bobcat, to thank her. Thank a wild animal? David raised an eyebrow. I know how it sounds, Jennifer admitted. But this isn't just any wild animal. Charlie would have died out there if she hadn't found him. The rangers said she carried him through deep snow to her den, kept him warm, then actually went and found help when she realized he needed more than she could provide. She looked at her husband. How is that different from what any good Samaritan would do? David had no answer. The story had affected them all deeply, challenging their understanding of the boundaries between wild and domestic instinct and something that looked remarkably like conscious choice. What did the kids have in mind? He finally asked. Emma wants to draw pictures for the bobcat kittens. Liam suggested we donate to wildlife conservation in her honor. Jennifer smiled. They're processing it in their own ways. And you? David asked, noting his wife's pensive expression. I keep thinking about her searching for Charlie even after having her own babies. Dr. Vasquez mentioned it when she called to check on him yesterday. Jennifer watched Charlie tugging playfully at Liam's sock. She formed a bond with him, David, and then we took him away. We didn't take him away, we reclaimed our pet. A pet that belongs in a human home. I know that. Logically, I know that's true. But emotionally, she trailed off, unable to articulate the complex feelings the situation had stirred in her. Back at Outpost 7, Michael and Elena were reviewing the data collected over the past 3 days, temperature readings from the den, feeding patterns, vocalization frequency, and other measurable metrics that might help explain the bobcat's unusual behavior. Her cortisol levels seem elevated compared to typical post-birth readings for bobcats, Elena noted, examining blood samples collected from fur the mother had shed. That could indicate stress. From losing Charlie, Michael suggested. Possibly, or from the increased human presence or awareness of the wolf pack passing nearby. Elena frowned at the readings. We can observe behavior, Michael, but interpreting the emotional state behind that behavior crosses into dangerous anthropomorphism. Before Michael could respond, his radio crackled urgently. "Callahan, this is Torres at the North Checkpoint. We've got a situation. Unauthorized civilians bypassed the barrier, heading toward Sector 5 on snowmobiles. At least 3 individuals with camera equipment." Michael grabbed the radio. "How the hell did they get past the checkpoints?" "They came through the old logging road. It's not on the main closure maps. We're in pursuit, but they've got at least a 10-minute head start." Michael was already pulling on his coat. "They're heading right for the den area. Alert all available rangers, establish a perimeter. No one approaches within half a mile of Marker Point Alpha." Elena was gathering her medical kit. If they disturb the mother, she might abandon the kittens. "Or attack the intruders," Michael added grimly. "Either way, we need to intercept them before they reach the den." As they rushed outside toward the snowmobiles, Michael cast one last glance at the monitor, showing the Bobcat and her kittens, peaceful and unaware of the approaching threat. The remarkable mother who had defied nature to save a puppy was now facing a more familiar danger. Human intrusion into her world, driven by curiosity and the desire to capture something wild for public consumption. The snowmobiles roared through the pristine forest, their mechanical growl shattering the winter silence. Michael led the way, his years of experience navigating these woods evident in the precision with which he avoided hidden obstacles beneath the snow. Elena followed closely, with 2 additional rangers joining from other checkpoints as they converged on the intruder's position. Through his helmet communicator, Michael coordinated the response. "Torres, circle around to the eastern approach. Peterson, come in from the west. We'll create a containment perimeter before they reach the den site." "Copy that," came the crisp responses. On his GPS, Michael could see the unauthorized vehicle's position. They had stopped approximately quarter-mile from the Bobcat's den, close enough to potentially disturb her with their noise and scent, but still far enough that interception was possible before they could make visual contact. 3 individuals reported Ranger Torres through the radio. "Professional camera equipment, satellite uplink, looks like a news crew." Michael's jaw clenched beneath his helmet. The story had been too tempting, the potential footage too valuable for someone to resist breaking the rules. He pushed his snowmobile faster, the machine responding with a surge of power as it crested a small rise. They spotted the intruders moments later. 2 men and a woman in expensive winter gear, their snowmobiles parked as they unloaded equipment from attached cases. The logo on their jackets matched a major cable wildlife channel, confirming Michael's suspicions. "Park Rangers," Michael announced as they approached, his voice carrying authority despite his exhaustion. "This is a restricted area under federal wildlife protection. You are in violation of multiple regulations." The woman, clearly the leader, stepped forward, her expression unrepentant. "Diane Frost, Global Wildlife Network. We're documenting an unprecedented natural phenomenon for educational purposes." "You're trespassing in a restricted zone and endangering protected wildlife," Elena countered, dismounting her snowmobile. "Your educational purposes required proper authorization, which you deliberately circumvented. The public has a right to see this remarkable story," Frost argued, her cameraman continuing to assemble his equipment despite the confrontation. "A predator saving prey goes against everything we understand about natural behavior. This footage could revolutionize how people perceive wildlife." "What it could do," Michael said, stepping between the crew and their camera, "is stress a mother bobcat to the point of abandoning her newborn kittens. Is that the educational moment you're hoping to capture?" The standoff might have escalated further, but a sharp alert from Michael's tablet interrupted the confrontation. He pulled it from his pack, Elena moving to his side to view the screen. The live feed from the den showed the Bobcat on high alert, her ears swiveled toward the den entrance, body tense with alarm. "She's detected your presence," Elena said, turning the tablet to show the news crew. "Another few minutes of your engines and equipment and she could panic." When that happens, predators have two responses: flee or fight. Either way, those kittens are at risk. Something in the real-time footage, the visible stress in the animal they had come to document, seemed to penetrate where regulations and warnings had failed. Diane Frost's expression shifted from defiance to concern. "We didn't intend to cause harm," she said, her professional demeanor slipping. "The story was just so extraordinary." "It is extraordinary," Michael agreed, seizing the opening. "Which is why we're documenting every aspect professionally, with protocols designed to minimize stress on the animals. When we have footage that can be safely shared, it will be made available to all media outlets simultaneously." It was a compromise he had no authority to offer, but in the moment, it served its purpose. The news crew reluctantly began packing up their equipment, though Frost made one final appeal. "Could we at least interview you? Get your first-hand account of finding the puppy in her den? We came all the way from New York." Michael shook his head. "Not here, not now. You can arrange a proper interview through park headquarters away from the exclusion zone." As the rangers escorted the disappointed crew back toward the main roads, Michael remained behind, watching the tablet with concern. The Bobcat was still agitated, pacing the entrance to her den, occasionally making short forays outside before returning to her kittens. "She's spooked but settling," Elena observed, having stayed with Michael. "The kittens are still nursing and appear unharmed. We got lucky." Michael nodded grimly. "This time, but now that someone's found a way past our perimeter, others will try." "What are you suggesting?" "We need a more comprehensive solution, something that protects her from disturbance, while still allowing us to document this unique situation." Back at park headquarters, Director Sanders was reaching a similar conclusion as he faced a room full of researchers, conservationists, and media representatives who had gathered for the daily briefing on what was now being called the Compassionate Bobcat case. "We understand the scientific significance and public interest," he was explaining, his patience wearing thin after days of similar conversations. "But our primary responsibility is to the wildlife under our protection. The exclusion zone remains in effect, and today's incident only reinforces why those restrictions are necessary." Dr. Catherine Wilson, a renowned animal behaviorist from Cornell University who had flown in specifically for this case, raised her hand. "Director Sanders, has any thought been given to a controlled reintroduction of the puppy? Even briefly? The research value would be immeasurable." A murmur ran through the assembled group. The suggestion had been raised before in scientific circles, but never so publicly. "Absolutely not," Sanders replied firmly. "The puppy has been returned to his family. He's a domestic animal, not a research subject, and the Bobcat needs to focus on raising her own kittens." "But she's still searching for him," countered Wilson. "Your own reports indicate she performs seeking behavior twice daily. That suggests an attachment that transcends typical predator instincts." "Which is precisely why we're documenting everything for future study," Sanders said. "But we will not intervene or experiment with wild animals or people's pets." The scientific debate continued, but Sanders's phone vibrating in his pocket signaled the update he'd been waiting for. Excusing himself, he stepped outside to take Michael's call. "The news crew has been escorted out of the park," Michael reported. "But this is just the beginning. That boundary was breached once, it will be breached again." "I know," Sanders sighed. "The pressure here is mounting too. Every researcher with a theory wants access, and the media coverage is only intensifying. What's your assessment of the Bobcat's condition?" "Physically, she and the kittens are thriving, but behaviorally..." Michael hesitated. "Sir, she's still looking for Charlie. Every morning and evening like clockwork. Elena thinks it's affecting her stress levels." There was a long pause as Sanders weighed options, none of them perfect. I'm open to suggestions, Ranger Callahan. I have one, Michael said, but it's unconventional. Across town, the Peterson family was finishing dinner when their phone rang. David answered, his expression changing from confusion to surprise as he listened. "It's for you," he said, handing the phone to Jennifer. "Dr. Vasquez from the Wildlife Center." Jennifer took the call, her children watching curiously as her eyes widened. "You want to what?" she asked incredulously. "I don't understand how that would—" "Yes, he's completely recovered. No, I understand the scientific value, but—" She listened for several more minutes, occasionally glancing at Charlie, who was contentedly chewing a toy beneath the dining table, oblivious to the conversation that concerned him. "We'd need to discuss this as a family," Jennifer finally said. "Can I call you back tomorrow morning?" After ending the call, she turned to find David and the children watching expectantly. "What did they want?" Emma asked immediately. Jennifer took a deep breath. "They want to bring Charlie back to the forest, not to leave him," she added quickly, seeing her children's alarm. "Just for a brief, controlled visit. They think the Bobcat is missing him." "Missing him?" David repeated skeptically. "Like emotionally missing him?" "Apparently she keeps searching for him, even after having her own kittens. Dr. Vasquez says it's behavior they've never documented before." Jennifer knelt to scratch Charlie behind the ears, the puppy responding with typical enthusiasm. "They want to observe what happens if Charlie is brought near the den, not inside, just close enough for her to detect his scent. For science, but also..." "Also what?" David prompted. Jennifer looked up, her expression conflicted. "Also for closure. Dr. Vasquez thinks it might help the Bobcat stop searching and focus fully on her kittens if she knows Charlie is okay." Emma's eyes were wide with wonder. "The wild kitty gets to say goodbye to Charlie?" "Something like that," Jennifer acknowledged. "It's a strange request, I know." David shook his head in disbelief. "A week ago, I would have said this was crazy. But after everything that's happened," he looked down at Charlie, happily oblivious to the extraordinary role he had played in challenging scientific understanding. "What do you think we should do?" Dawn broke crisp and clear over the Montana forest, the morning sun casting long blue shadows across the pristine snow. At Outpost 7, an unprecedented gathering of wildlife professionals worked with quiet efficiency, setting up what might be the most unusual scientific observation in the park's history. Dr. Vasquez checked the array of specialized cameras positioned strategically around a small clearing 200 yards from the Bobcat's den, close enough for scent detection but far enough to minimize stress. Each camera offered different capabilities: thermal imaging, high-speed capture for analyzing micro-expressions, and standard high-definition video that would document whatever transpired from multiple angles. "Recording systems online," confirmed a technician from the university research team that had been granted limited access. "All feeds transmitting to the secure server." Michael observed the preparations with mixed emotions. After 3 sleepless nights, the plan he had proposed was being implemented with remarkable speed and cooperation from all parties. Yet doubt lingered. Were they doing the right thing, or simply satisfying human curiosity at the expense of wild animals? "Second thoughts?" Elena asked quietly, joining him at the perimeter. "Several," he admitted. "We're interfering with natural processes based on our interpretation of an animal's behavior. That goes against everything I was trained to do." "True," Elena nodded, "but everything about this situation has defied conventional wildlife management from the beginning. Sometimes unprecedented circumstances require unprecedented responses." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a Park Service SUV. The Peterson family emerged, bundled against the morning chill, David and Jennifer in front, children Emma and Liam wide-eyed with excitement, and Charlie securely leashed in David's careful grip. The puppy seemed energized by the return to the forest, his nose working overtime to process the symphony of wilderness scents. Michael approached the family. "Thank you for agreeing to this. I know it's an unusual request." "We talked about it all night," Jennifer admitted. "It still seems surreal, bringing our puppy to meet a wild bobcat that saved his life." "Will we get to see the bobcat?" Emma asked eagerly. "You'll remain at a safe observation distance," Michael explained, kneeling to the child's level. "Remember what we discussed on the phone? Wild animals need space, especially mothers with babies." Emma nodded solemnly. "Dr. Vasquez said we have to be very quiet and not make any sudden movements." "That's exactly right." Michael smiled, impressed by the child's comprehension. "This is a scientific observation, not a petting zoo visit." The family was escorted to a camouflage blind that had been set up at the edge of the clearing. Inside, monitors displayed the live feed from the den where the bobcat was currently grooming her kittens, unaware of the activity happening nearby. "She's beautiful," Liam whispered, eyes wide as he saw the bobcat for the first time. "She saved Charlie," Emma added with the simple certainty of a child. "She's a hero kitty." David Peterson watched the monitor with a more complex expression. A practical man who had initially been skeptical of the entire endeavor, he found himself moved by the sight of the wild animal who had, against all natural logic, preserved his family's beloved pet. "What exactly do you expect to happen?" he asked the assembled scientists. Dr. Catherine Wilson, the animal behaviorist who had been permitted to join the observation team, answered, "We're establishing a controlled environment to observe interspecies recognition and potential social bonding that transcends predator-prey instincts. In layman's terms, we want to see if she remembers Charlie and how she reacts to his presence." "And this helps her how?" Jennifer asked, the primary concern that had ultimately convinced her to agree to the experiment. "If our hypothesis is correct," Elena explained, "confirming Charlie's well-being might allow her to stop the searching behavior and focus fully on her kittens. It's similar to how humans sometimes need closure after loss." "It's still just a hypothesis," Michael cautioned. "We're in uncharted territory here." The preparations continued with methodical precision. A small warming tent was erected in the clearing where Charlie would be temporarily placed with Jennifer. The location had been carefully selected, downwind from the den so the bobcat would detect their scent once she emerged for her morning patrol. "The bobcat is moving," announced the technician monitoring the den cameras. "She's placed the kittens in the secure rear chamber and is approaching the entrance." Everyone fell silent, watching the monitors as the bobcat cautiously emerged from her den. As observed on previous mornings, she began her now familiar ritual, checking the entrance area where Charlie had once been kept, making soft vocalizations that the sound equipment captured with crystal clarity. "That's the same call she's been making each morning," Michael confirmed. "Now she'll begin a perimeter check of the area surrounding the den." True to prediction, the bobcat began a careful patrol, moving with the silent grace characteristic of her species. About halfway through her typical route, she suddenly froze, her head lifting as a new scent reached her sensitive nose. "She's detected them," Wilson whispered, excitement evident in her voice despite her professional demeanor. "Look at her body language, complete alertness, but no fear posture." The bobcat remained motionless for several long moments, her entire being focused on processing the familiar scent that had suddenly appeared in her territory. Then, with deliberate movements that suggested both caution and purpose, she changed direction, heading straight toward the clearing where Charlie waited. "It's time," Michael said softly to Jennifer. "Are you ready?" She nodded, gathering Charlie into her arms. "What should I do exactly?" "Just sit with him in the tent with the flap open. Keep him calm and quiet. Don't make any attempt to approach or interact with the bobcat if she appears. This is her choice, not ours. Jennifer carried Charlie to the small tent, settling cross-legged on the insulated floor with the puppy in her lap. Charlie seemed to sense the importance of the moment, remaining unusually still except for his nose, which worked continuously as he processed the complex scents of the forest. Everyone maintained position and silence, Michael instructed through the communication system that connected all observers. No matter what happens next, there is to be no interference unless I give the signal. The wait was not long. Within minutes, movement at the forest edge signaled the bobcat's approach. She emerged from the tree line with extreme caution, her spotted coat blending perfectly with the dappled shadows of the winter forest. Her amber eyes fixed immediately on the tent where Jennifer sat with Charlie. "Remarkable," breathed Dr. Wilson. "No predatory stalking posture. She's approaching with what we'd classify as social investigation behavior." In the observation blind, the Peterson family watched with a mixture of awe and trepidation. Emma clutched her father's hand tightly, while Liam pressed himself against the window for a better view. "She's looking for Charlie," Emma whispered. "She remembers him." The bobcat continued her approach, stopping approximately 30 feet from the tent, close enough to clearly see and scent its occupants, but maintaining a safe distance that respected both wild and human boundaries. For several breathless moments, she simply stood watching, her tail moving in small twitches that indicated intense focus rather than agitation. Inside the tent, Charlie suddenly perked up, his ears forward and tail beginning to wag as he detected the bobcat's presence. He gave a small whine, straining slightly against Jennifer's gentle restraint. "He recognizes her too," Jennifer said softly into the communication device. "He's excited, not afraid." The bobcat's ears swiveled forward at the sound of Charlie's whine. She took 2 more careful steps forward, then did something that caused gasps among the scientific observers. She sat down in the snow, assuming a non-threatening posture that communicated neither aggression nor fear, but something much more complex: recognition. "I've never seen anything like this," Wilson murmured, frantically taking notes. "This challenges everything we understand about predator behavior." As if responding to some unspoken communication, Charlie gave another soft whine. The bobcat answered with the same chirping vocalization she had been making during her searches, a sound now captured perfectly by the directional microphones. "They're communicating," Elena said in wonder, "actually communicating across species." For nearly 10 minutes, this extraordinary tableau held, the wild bobcat sitting calmly in the snow, occasionally making soft vocalizations, while Charlie responded with gentle whines, his tail wagging steadily. Neither attempted to approach the other further, yet the connection between them was undeniable. Then, with the same deliberate grace that characterized all her movements, the bobcat stood. She made one final, slightly different vocalization, a sound the wildlife experts recognized as the call mother bobcats used when summoning kittens from a den. "She's saying goodbye," Michael said softly, certainty in his voice despite the impossibility of truly knowing an animal's intentions. As if confirming his interpretation, the bobcat turned and walked unhurriedly back toward the forest edge. At the tree line, she paused, looking back once more at the tent where Charlie sat with Jennifer. Then she vanished into the shadows, her passage so silent and fluid, she might have been a ghost. Inside the tent, Jennifer found herself brushing away unexpected tears. "Did that really just happen?" she whispered, holding Charlie close as he watched the spot where the bobcat had disappeared. "It happened," Michael confirmed through the communication system, his own voice thick with emotion. "And we've documented every moment." In the observation blind, Emma turned to her father with shining eyes. "They said goodbye to each other, Dad." The wild kitty knows Charlie is okay now. David Peterson, who had begun this experience as the most skeptical member of his family, found himself without words. The simple interaction he had just witnessed between predator and prey, wild and domestic, had shaken his understanding of the natural world in ways he couldn't yet articulate. As the scientific team began the process of collecting and securing their precious data, Michael's attention remained fixed on the monitor showing the bobcat's return to her den. Her movements seemed different somehow, more purposeful, less restless than in days past. "Look," he said to Elena, pointing to the screen. "She's going straight to her kittens. No searching behavior, no checking the entrance chamber first." Elena studied the footage, her scientific training warring with the emotional impact of what they had witnessed. "One data point isn't conclusive," she cautioned automatically, then smiled. "But in this case, I think we may have our answer." The bobcat settled with her kittens, who immediately began nursing. For the first time since Charlie had been removed from her care, she appeared completely focused on her biological offspring, her mysterious searching ritual apparently concluded by the encounter in the clearing. "Closure," Michael said quietly. That's what she needed, what they both needed. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting the forest in brilliant winter light, the extraordinary experiment concluded. Data would be analyzed, papers would be written, and scientific understanding of animal behavior might be forever altered by what had transpired in this remote Montana clearing. But beyond the science, something more profound had occurred. A moment of connection across the boundaries that supposedly separated wild from domestic, instinct from emotion, human understanding from animal experience. In that moment, those boundaries had been revealed as more permeable than anyone had imagined possible. 1 year later, spring had transformed the Montana landscape, the forest now vibrant with new growth replacing the stark white canvas of winter. Michael Callahan stood at the edge of a familiar clearing, binoculars raised as he conducted his monthly observation. His appearance had changed subtly over the past year. The exhaustion had long since faded, replaced by the quiet confidence of a man whose career had found new purpose. "Any sign of her?" asked Dr. Elena Vasquez, joining him with her own observation equipment. "Not yet," Michael replied, "but it's early. The cameras caught her in this area yesterday with all 3 kittens, almost full grown now." In the years since the extraordinary encounter between Charlie the puppy and the bobcat, who had saved his life, much had changed. The observation equipment remained, though significantly reduced, providing ongoing documentation of what had become the most comprehensive long-term study of bobcat behavior ever conducted. The research station that had once been Outpost 7 had been expanded into a small but state-of-the-art wildlife monitoring facility, now officially named the Interspecies Behavior Research Center. "Conference preparations complete?" Michael asked as they continued their survey of the area. Elena nodded. "Final agenda approved this morning. We're expecting over 200 researchers from 23 countries. Not bad for our first year." The International Scientific Conference, Compassion Beyond Species, Re-examining Animal Cognition and Emotion, had grown from the unprecedented data collected during what the research community now called the Montana Incident. What had begun as a miraculous rescue had evolved into a serious scientific inquiry that was challenging long-held assumptions about animal behavior. "The Peterson family confirmed they'll attend the public session," Elena added. "Charlie, too, of course. He's quite the celebrity these days." Michael smiled at the mention of the puppy who had unwittingly changed so many lives. Now a healthy adult dog, Charlie had become something of an ambassador himself, accompanying the Peterson children to schools where they shared their story to promote wildlife conservation and coexistence. Movement at the forest edge caught their attention. With practiced precision, both professionals raised their binoculars simultaneously. "There she is," Michael said softly, a note of reverence in his voice. The bobcat emerged from the underbrush, noticeably larger and more muscular than she had been a year ago. Behind her followed 3 nearly grown kittens, now almost as large as their mother, though still bearing the distinctive markings of adolescence. The family moved with coordinated grace through the clearing, completely wild yet somehow connected to the humans observing from a respectful distance. All 3 kittens survived to adulthood, Elena noted with professional satisfaction. That's an exceptional success rate, especially considering the disruptions during their early development. She's an exceptional mother, Michael replied simply. The data collected over the past year had revealed much about this particular bobcat. She had proven to be an efficient hunter, a protective mother, and most surprisingly to researchers, maintained a territory significantly closer to human habitation than was typical for her species. Whether this represented a unique adaptation or was simply this individual's preference remained a subject of ongoing study. The bobcat paused in the center of the clearing, her amber eyes scanning the environment with the alertness characteristic of her species. For a brief moment, those eyes seemed to lock onto the camouflaged observation post where Michael and Elena stood. Recognition was impossible to confirm scientifically, yet Michael felt the connection nonetheless. "She knows we're here," he said quietly. Possibly, Elena conceded, the year of extraordinary observations having softened her strict scientific skepticism. Her sensory capabilities certainly make it likely she's detected our presence. The bobcat continued on her way, leading her nearly grown offspring toward the eastern valley. The young bobcats had begun the process of establishing their own territories, though they still hunted alongside their mother, learning the final lessons before full independence. As the wildlife professionals packed up their equipment, conversation turned to the broader impact of the past year's events. What had begun as one bobcat's inexplicable act of compassion had rippled outward, affecting conservation policy, research priorities, and public perception in ways no one could have predicted. The governor's signing the expanded wildlife corridor legislation tomorrow, Elena mentioned as they walked back toward their vehicle. Another 30,000 acres of connected habitat protected from development, directly inspired by one photogenic bobcat and a puppy, Michael noted with satisfaction. Public opinion is a powerful force when properly engaged. The Compassionate Predator Initiative, as the legislation was known, had gained surprising bipartisan support after the story captured national attention. What might have once been dismissed as anthropomorphism had been transformed through careful scientific documentation and public education into a compelling case for more nuanced approaches to wildlife management. Back at the research center, they found Catherine Wilson deep in analysis of the latest behavioral data. The renowned animal behaviorist had extended her temporary visit into a permanent research position, unable to tear herself away from what she called the most significant advancement in cross-species behavioral understanding of our generation. "You're back earlier than expected," she noted, looking up from her computer. "Everything all right with our subject?" "Perfect," Elena confirmed. "A family unit intact, all 3 offspring thriving, hunting patterns stable." "Excellent," Catherine nodded. "The comparative cognition team from Oxford arrives tomorrow. They're particularly interested in the vocalizations we've documented." The scientific papers published over the past year had sparked intense debate in wildlife research circles. Terms like cross-species empathy and cognitive flexibility in predators, once considered almost taboo in serious behavioral science, were now being cautiously incorporated into peer-reviewed literature. As Michael prepared his monthly report that evening, he found himself reflecting on how one extraordinary event had transformed not just his career, but his understanding of the natural world. The neat categories that had once defined his training, predator and prey, wild and domestic, instinct and cognition, had been revealed as far more permeable than anyone had imagined. Across town, in the Peterson home, a similar reflection was taking place. The family had gathered in their living room, where a framed photograph now held pride of place above the fireplace. Charlie as a puppy alongside a carefully rendered artistic representation of the Bobcat, based on Michael's original photographs. Beneath it, a simple inscription: "Compassion knows no boundaries." Charlie himself lay contentedly at Emma's feet as she completed a school assignment, an essay titled "How Animals Think and Feel," that would have seemed simplistic before their experience, but now represented the cutting edge of scientific reconsideration. "Do you think she still remembers Charlie?" Liam asked, a question he had posed periodically throughout the year. Jennifer considered her answer carefully, as she always did when her children asked about the extraordinary events that had changed their family's perspective so profoundly. "The scientists would say we can't know for certain what another species remembers or feels," she began, "but sometimes understanding goes beyond what science can measure. Like when Charlie gets excited every time we drive near the forest where it happened," Emma added. "He remembers." David, whose initial skepticism had given way to thoughtful reconsideration, nodded. "I believe she remembers in her own way. Not like we remember perhaps, but in a way that matters to her." Charlie, hearing his name, lifted his head and wagged his tail gently. Whatever memories or associations existed in his canine mind remained his own mystery, yet his continued good health and happy disposition were testament to how completely he had recovered from his wilderness ordeal. The next morning, as scientists from around the world began gathering for the conference that would examine the implications of what had happened in these Montana woods, the Bobcat and her nearly grown offspring continued their lives in the wilderness. Unaware of their celebrity, untroubled by the scientific debates their story had sparked, they moved through their world with the ancient wisdom of their species, hunting, resting, surviving. Yet in one small but significant way, this particular Bobcat remained extraordinary. The searching behavior she had exhibited after Charlie's removal, the ritual checking of the den entrance, the distinctive vocalizations, had never returned. After their final encounter in the clearing, something had changed. Some need had been satisfied. While science struggled to find language precise enough to describe what had happened, the simplest explanation remained the most compelling. She had found closure. In the year since a pregnant bobcat had refused to leave a crying puppy in the snow, the boundary between human understanding and animal experience had shifted, not erased, for the wild remained wild, and the fundamental nature of predator and prey unchanged, but perhaps rendered more translucent, allowing glimpses across the divide that separated species. As Michael Callahan would later write in the conclusion to his landmark paper on the incident, what we witnessed challenges us to reconsider not just animal behavior, but our understanding of compassion itself. If a wild predator can transcend instinct to preserve the life of natural prey, perhaps the capacity for connection extends further through the web of life than we have dared to imagine. Not because animals are becoming more like us, but because we are finally learning to see them more clearly, as they truly are in all their complex sentient wonder.